Well, thanks very much, everybody, for joining us here today for this webinar. As many of you will know, we've been running quite a few webinars over the autumn, and this is the latest in our webinar series of Big Questions, Big Ideas. My name is Tim Cairns, and I'm the Director for Policy and Nations, and also Director for Northern Ireland here at the Community Transport Association. We've had two previous Big Questions, Big Ideas sessions. And what we've tried to do in these sessions is to provide members with some thought-provoking information from both inside and outside the sector to help you to run your service differently, or just to spark a thought in your head that might give you ideas about how you would want to change or adapt, or just to think differently about how you're offering the services that you offer. In previous sessions, we've looked at how coronavirus has affected our passenger transport and how we can offer that transport in a safe and caring way. We've also looked at the question of transport poverty, and have things got worse, or is this an opportunity for us to help communities to build back better and to build transport networks that are better? But we've also been looking at some how-to sessions. There are good-to-go sessions, and we've also had Meet the Minister sessions in Northern Ireland, Scotland, and just this morning in Wales. All of those previous webinars that we've been running are all online, so they're there for you to access at any time. And as Emer said there, as she introduced the session today, we're also recording this event, and it will be available online, so you can watch again if you've had an idea that sparks some thought in your head, or you can share that with somebody else in your organisation who you may feel benefits from the ideas that we talk about in our session today. Well, what's our big question and the big ideas that we're going to look at today? And our big question is this: how do we continue to build our volunteer base and inspire new volunteering opportunities? I think, as we all know, volunteers are the backbone of community transport. Just yesterday, I and some of our members in Northern Ireland were privileged to give some evidence to the Infrastructure Committee at the Northern Ireland Assembly. There's one statistic that really struck me as we were presenting to that committee. 35% of all grant-funded community transport services in Northern Ireland, that's more than a third of our community transport services that are grant-funded by the Department for Infrastructure in Northern Ireland, are more than 35% of those services are delivered by volunteers. Without the dedication of those volunteers, the service just simply couldn't be implemented and run. But also, to replace those volunteers with a minimum wage salary in Northern Ireland would cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. Well, if that's the position in Northern Ireland, if you extrapolate that across the rest of the UK, you can see the financial contribution that volunteers make. But we know that volunteers are more than just finances. Volunteers are there to ensure that our passengers are safe. They're the people who care for our passengers, who ensure that our passengers are respected, looked after, and get what they need. Volunteers aren't just statistics, aren't just money. They're people who make our services work better. In lockdown, we saw hundreds of thousands of people step forward to volunteer. And as services are now up and running again, or getting back to some sort of semblance of normality with all of the restrictions that we've got, we want to see today how we can ensure that our volunteers are kept safe, and how we can tap into new volunteering ideas, and how we can tap into the volunteers that have emerged during the pandemic, and how we can create new ways and better ways to create volunteering opportunities and experiences within our organisations. And we're also going to look today at technology and see how technology could add to the experience that we've got in community transport with how our people volunteer. Today's not a how-to, it's just bringing those questions and ideas to you just to explore them. And maybe today you might get a nugget of thought that helps or sparks inspiration for you and your organisation. Today's not about the right way or the wrong way to do things. Today's just about us thinking together about volunteering in community transport. Well, it's a packed agenda today, and so I hope you've got your lunch and a cup of tea, because we also want you to be involved. This is not just about you listening to a panel discussing volunteering. We want you to be involved today in this session. And we're very lucky that we've got a co-host who's going to help you get involved. So Emer Murphy is going to co-host the session with us. So Emer, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us how you'll be helping people get involved?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Tim. My name is Emer Murphy. I am the Support and Engagement Executive for CTA in Scotland. So throughout today's session, I will be running a series of polls. So the first 4 polls that I'm going to launch is to investigate whether your volunteering pool has increased or decreased over COVID-19. So once you have submitted your answer to this poll, please feel free to write the organisation that you are representing and an explanation of your answer into our chat function, and we will revisit some of this feedback throughout the session. Also, if you have more technical questions that come up for you throughout the session, please feel free to email our advice inbox, which is advice@ctauk.org. I can already see the chat is beginning to become lively, which is fantastic to see. So I'll now launch the poll and hand you back over to Tim.
Thank you very much, Emer. We're not going to have any presentations today. You can see our panel on the screen. We're going to try and have a conversation today. We're going to try and speak together about what some of the new innovations and thoughts are in and around volunteering. And we're going to maybe explore how we can tap into the sort of volunteering spirit that we saw emerging during lockdown in 2020. So let's introduce our panel today, and then we'll get the conversation going. We've got Denise Hayward with us. Denise is the Chief Executive of Volunteer Now in Northern Ireland. She's held that post since 2017, but she's been steeped in the volunteering sector going back to 2001, has worked in bringing extensive experience in structuring public organisational theory, volunteering policy, developing local infrastructure and engagement, supporting good practice in volunteering, supporting young people and older people into volunteering, as well as being a volunteer herself with the Armagh Talking newspaper and also volunteering with Tier Fund. We also have Emily Doherty along with us today. As I think maybe some of you who joined early heard that we were talking about Thanksgiving. We're very lucky that we've got Emily here today. She's from America, and I lived for a short time in North America, and people always used to say to me, "Where's your accent from?" So we can clear that up with Emily. Emily's from Massachusetts, and she's the project manager for the Asylum Seekers Community Transport Scheme at the African Community Centre in Swansea, Wales. That's a National Lottery funded project, and it's to improve the lives of asylum seekers who face a real financial burden in the United Kingdom. It's to try and relieve them of that transport financial burden that they have when they're living on such a low amount of money of £158.48 per month. And Emily's organisation tries to make that little bit of money that they get go that little bit further.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Emily, for coming along today. I think, I'm not sure if she's joined yet, but we're hopeful that we've got Jan Morgan coming, who is one of the volunteers in Emily's scheme, and hopefully we'll be talking to her as well. Our last panelist is Jamie Noble. Jamie has worked in commercial roles for some of the largest tech companies, and after taking a career break, he did some volunteering work himself and was recruited after that volunteering work to solve some issues for the health service and social care in a startup. He became interested in that sort of healthcare and transport and solving those social care problems through technology. And that led him to do an MSc in digital healthcare systems at Strathclyde University. He's currently working on an NHS Innovation Challenge around delayed discharge and the use of digital apps in volunteering. So thank you very much to our panel today for taking time out of their lunchtime to speak to us and maybe spark some ideas for us in the community transport space. First, I want to turn to Denise and get to the bottom of what's been going on in 2020 and in volunteering this year. Denise, this has obviously been a strange year for everybody, not just in community transport, but all of us. Right at the start of the pandemic, we saw a large amount of people signing up to volunteer. So I've really got a three-part question for you. Why did people sign up? Why did we see that large amount of people sign up? Why didn't everybody who signed up in the early part of the lockdown, why didn't they get volunteering opportunities? And then I think for us in community transport, how can we tap into that volunteer spirit that we saw? How can we help those volunteers that step forward experience rewarding opportunities?
Okay, Tim, I'm going to crack on with a number of those questions, and interrupt me if you think I have missed something or haven't hit the answer that you're looking for. So, in reflection back onto the heady days that were the springtime, we had in Northern Ireland 4,000 people sign up in the space of 3 weeks to our database, and ordinarily we would sign up about 2,500 a year. So you can see that in the space of 3 weeks we had nearly double what we would have on an annual basis. So, and I don't think we were alone. Certainly talking to partners in England and Scotland and Wales, I think that same phenomenon was repeated across the piece, and also at local level. So we, talking to local organisations that we would normally funnel our volunteers through to from that sort of regional database, we were seeing the same pattern emerging just across the board. So I suppose what you were saying there was a combination of wanting to help, people feeling, and you do see that in the emergency response literature around volunteering, that immediate upswell of kind of spontaneous volunteering is well documented. So I think that's exactly what we saw in the springtime. And I mean, I always think that's a really fantastic testament to people's community spirit and wanting to be of some use, which is lovely. The second thing I think that came in, there were sort of three kind of perfect storm things. I think the furlough scheme, a lot of people suddenly had time on their hands. They were sitting at home and they thought, well, look, I could do something more useful. So I think that was part of the picture too. And I think also the Prime Minister's call in particular for the NHS responders was definitely a narrative that we were hearing, even in Northern Ireland, where there isn't an NHS responder scheme functioning because our NHS didn't put a call out for volunteers in Northern Ireland. Having said that, we were getting people signing up saying, I want to help the NHS. So that narrative was very much part of that zeitgeist. And I think also, even with the media, I mean, I don't know, you wouldn't have had to turn on the radio or anything for very long before there was a narrative about volunteering, which quite honestly, as a volunteering specialist, I would have paid money for many times over in the last 5, 6, 10 years and couldn't have got for love nor money. But now that was very much part of what people were talking about. So I think there was kind of a lot of things going on there. And you saw it even with the clap for carers and all of that. That kind of community spirit was very much more prevalent in the world. So coming then to your next question, why do people not get opportunities? I like to think about that as, why do people not get opportunities yet? Because I don't think personally we haven't let those volunteers go, and certainly in Northern Ireland we're continuing to keep in touch with people and continuing to offer them opportunities, and we are seeing people still picking up on opportunities even now, months later, which I think is good. So it's part, for me, it's part of that initial conversation and continuing that conversation with people. They may not have got opportunity right then because simple supply and demand economics. I mean, there were just so many people coming forward. So I definitely think that was part of it. I think also there are issues about systems issues, about linkages. I definitely think this has really shown that up, how regional infrastructure bodies like ourselves link into those local community organisations. And I suppose also in the middle of the storm, those organisations were flat to the mat. They didn't have time to do anything. And so to think that they could have onboarded new volunteers in that time was probably naive anyway. So I think there were a whole pile of structural issues. And I know that certainly we're doing lots of reflective pieces at the moment with partners across the UK to try and get to the bottom of why some of those things happened and to look at how you can learn from that. So I think there's lots of learning there.
Some research, Denise, being done into that.
Yes,
what happened?
yeah, we're partnering with colleagues across the UK looking at with ESRC research, which is literally just getting underway at the moment, to go back over, the mechanisms, what happened from a policy context, volunteering being a devolved matter and working differently in all 4 nations definitely played into some of these issues. So I think there were lots of things going on there, and I think it'll be time will tell. And I was just having a wee look at the chat, and I think also your participants are saying exactly what we experienced as well, because we run 2 transport schemes in terms of volunteer now, and we had a number of volunteers who were older, perhaps had health conditions themselves, who at that point stepped back, and then we had new volunteers come along at that point and have had subsequently. So what we've seen has been a real sort of ebb and flow. Perhaps some of the people who've been doing the heavy lifting for volunteering for many, many years, decades in some cases, have had to step back, but now there is a space for new people to come forward into that space as well. And the challenge is, will they? And if they do, will their expectations be the same as the people who have been there as the long-standing volunteers over the last number of years? So that might kind of give you, and your third part to your question, I mean, Tim, I think you're going to need to do some work as your chat show host. I mean, these 3-part questions are killers, but anyway, that's another matter for another day. So my third question was, how can community transport help people to kind of get rewarding roles? I suppose what I reflect on is what we've seen over the last number of months is almost change turbocharged. I mean, a lot of the trends we've seen in the last 6 or 8 months have been there coming down the track for some time. So the need for more flexibility in volunteering, the feeling about bureaucracy being too much, the issue about digitalization and needing to do more online, and all of those kinds of things. And that hugely important thing about volunteers owning their volunteering and directing their volunteering and having real buy-in to what they're doing. If you looked at the Time Well Spent report that NCVO published last year, all of those trends were there. But what we've seen over the last 8 months is that kind of almost on steroids. And what we're now going to have to do, I think, in picking up the volunteering landscape is start to think about how can we make what we were doing before fit with the change that we've all been living through over the last 8 months. Because when we re-emerge from this, it won't be as it was before. I don't think. So, I mean, personally, I think you're still talking about good quality opportunities. You're still talking about thinking about it from the perspective of the volunteer. You're still talking about making things meaningful. This flexibility and definitely that ownership and that feeling of buy-in is really, really important. So that would be my 3 answers, a bit long-winded, to your 3-part question.
And I suppose, is there an issue from an organisational perspective that maybe the organisation sees volunteering from their perspective and not from the volunteers' perspective? And we'll maybe explore some of this with Emily in a moment. But how do people then shift that perspective to looking at it from the volunteers' perspective? How would you advise someone to do that?
I think of it like that Venn diagram, when you did maths at school, there's the volunteers' perspective, there's the organisations, and the really important bit is that overlap and trying to make that as big as possible. Because so talk to your volunteers is the answer to that question. Don't assume you know what they think. Ask them what would make their role more interesting. What would they prefer to do? Ask them. Now, also we're going to talk about digitalization today. Obviously you're going to talk about that. That is the world we're living in now. Everything, we're doing the seminar online today. Not everybody's living in that world. So for some volunteers that and some service users or whatever, that will work great. For some people that won't work. And I suppose we're in that period of change, as a society. So we have to be able to do both. But there's nothing talking to your volunteers is where you need to be doing, spending your resources and your time, getting to know them, listening to what they're saying, taking on board their feedback and actually making change if you can. And if you can't, explain why you can't. Because sometimes it's not down to us. There's legislative requirements or whatever that we can't manage our way out of. But the volunteers who understand that can still stay with us. Do you know what I mean? But it's that dialogue, it's that relationship all the time with volunteers, all the time.
Well, you said something interesting there a few minutes ago. You said that we're going to have to live with the circumstances as we've got them now. So I wonder if we maybe take a look away from 2020 and, we all want to look away from 2020, I guess. But what can we expect going into 2021? How, or maybe it's too early to say, but how is the volunteering experience as it's been changed and shaped in 2020? How's that going to affect then volunteering in 2021 and beyond?
Well, you are going to have to start to replace the drivers and the volunteers that we have lost through 2020. The narrative in the media would make you think that everybody was inundated with volunteers, and clearly there's been just a shift. People have stood back who have long term been involved in volunteering, and so organisations are going to have to spend time recruiting and retraining and going down the line of supporting new people, because some of those people may come back if and when there's a vaccine and that's, it's safe to do so. Some of them will not come back because they'll have got out of the routine of it. Maybe their own health will have changed over the year. Lots of personal circumstances will have changed. So you may actually be talking about integrating a whole body of new volunteers. And so there will be a lot of demands on organisations in terms of that. You know, a lot of the mutual aid and the sort of softer level of volunteering, you know, that was very prevalent in the early part of the pandemic. Some of that will continue, but this is really where organisations will be stepping back into the space here, you know, to pick up some of this, to do the heavy lifting in the longer term, I think. So this is really where organisations, more organised volunteering will start to reassert itself, I think, in 2020. I mean, all of this depends, Tim, as well on when the vaccine really kicks in. I mean, you know, as soon as things start to go back to normal, you will start to see more normalization of this. At the moment, my members are telling me some of them have mothballed services, some of them are just not doing, and that's not just driving, obviously. I mean, it's lots of different volunteering opportunities. Lots of things are just on hold at the moment because they just simply can't. I mean, we sent out a note to members today about new restrictions in Northern Ireland, basically dialing back everything for the next 2 weeks. And until that kind of stop-start stuff kind of settles down, we're not going to be in a position to start to really, you know, motor on, I don't think. But I definitely think we are going. I mean, we have seen so much change to service as well. I mean, our befriending services, all of those are telephone befriending now. Will we go back to full face-to-face befriending? We will for some clients, we won't for others. You know, that sort of change that we've all had to be in the space of over the last number of months, some of it will stick and some of it won't. And it'll be a bit of time before we see how things settle back, if they ever do.
Yeah, it's interesting looking into 2021. You talk about a vaccine. I was just listening on the radio this morning. And, you know, if you think about it, there's whatever 65 million people in Britain, and they're saying rolling out the vaccine, you know, you'd need huge amounts of volunteers, because to do that in 2.5 months, you'd need to be delivering 1 million vaccines a day. So, you know, so even these challenges that we're facing in 2021, you know, where are we going to get the people to volunteer to do that? But so thanks, Denise. Emer, you've been running your poll. What have you found out? What have the participants been saying in the chat?
Absolutely. So hopefully you can all see the results of the poll on your screen now. So as you can see, there has been an increase in pool and volunteers by 16%, a decrease by 56%, and it has stayed the same for 28% for participants. And there has been some really interesting chat from our participants in the chat function about this, and it very much mirrors a lot of the challenges that you discussed, Denise. So there's some comments that I'd like to highlight from our participants. So from Ellesmere Port and Neston CT, they say our volunteers are all senior, so COVID has taken them out of our pool. We hope that they will come back shortly. And that has been a very common theme that has come up in our chat today. But in parallel to that, what a lot of our participants are speaking about is how they have used their volunteers in a different way. So for befriending services or for delivering food, etc. So from Baselaw Action Centre, their feedback was, we have lost a few volunteers for the car scheme due to COVID as they are elderly/vulnerable. They've increased volunteers for services such as befriending. Another really interesting factor that has come up in the chat quite a bit is that organisations say that they have spoken to their volunteers who say they will be more confident to return to their roles once the vaccine is rolled out. And we've briefly discussed this today, Denise, so it's very nice to hear that a lot of people are on the same page about that. So we're going to move on now swiftly to our next poll, which is about volunteer recruitment. So very similar to our last poll, once you submit your answers for this, please feel free to add some feedback into the chat so we can come back to it later on in the session.
Thanks, Emer. I look forward to hearing the results of that poll a little bit later on. Emily, you run a volunteer car scheme. Has your experience been similar to what our participants are saying in the chat and what Denise has shared? What's been your experience in lockdown and the pandemic in your car scheme?
Yeah, I'd say it's very similar to what Denise has said and what, you know, other people in the field are experiencing. So I had quite a good group of volunteers who were consistent, who are generally older, and some who have health conditions. So I've had quite a few people who've had to take a step back. But then similarly, the Swansea Council for Voluntary Service has done a tremendous job of getting loads and loads of new people who were interested in volunteering, and then directing them to available volunteer opportunities. So I've actually had an influx of quite more people than average from the previous years that I've run the scheme. So it's definitely that ebb and flow. You've got people coming in, you've got people kind of having to take a step back. As an organization, we've really tried to digitize a lot of our activities. So for those volunteers who've had to take a step back, we've encouraged them to join in to some of the online sessions that we've been doing. And I know that some volunteers have been able to do that, which is great. And I just think, some volunteers, are still communicating with some clients that they've built relationships with in the past, be it, WhatsApp or over the phone or whatever, but they're still kind of, checking in or, and asking me if there's anything else that they could possibly do. So I'd say for us as an organization, we've had to really reduce the journeys that we were doing. We used to do signing at immigration, education, any medical appointment, social opportunities, shopping, any sort of request. But thanks to CTA guidance and obviously guidance from Welsh Government, we've had to reduce the types of journeys that we're able to provide at this time. However, we still do loads of no contact foods, goods, other donations every week. So we're still supporting our clients, but obviously in a reduced capacity from what we used to be able to do.
Yeah, and well, so how have you been able to keep those volunteers engaged? You said you've done some online events, and what specifically, what form have they taken, or what specifically have you been doing? Has it been training, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I've been able to, provide, there's a lot of online training from SCVS. So anything that's relevant to a volunteer's role, I'm more than happy to support them in engaging that way. And then we've got weekly sessions for other projects within our organization. So we've got group counseling for men and for women, for example, but anybody is kind of welcome to join. So I know some of the women who used to volunteer drive, they usually attend like the women's session, or alternatively men can attend the men's session. And it's just an opportunity to, check in with people, see friendly faces. And we do bi-weekly, like a volunteers catch-up session. So again, that's open to any volunteer in the organization. They don't have to be a driver or admin, which is usually what I manage. They could be a volunteer counselor, or they could be a volunteer for another project. And it's just an opportunity to be able to see people and meet people, get updates on projects, get updates on the organization, and just trying to plan for the future as best we can.
So do you find that the volunteers really appreciate that regular contact, regular check-ins? Do you find that that's a successful way of keeping people engaged?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm always available. So, I just say, if you need me, email me, give me a call. I'm happy to engage with people. If they want to do Zoom, I know we're all tired of Zoom, but, if they want to do that, we can do that. And yeah, I just think it's, trying to, be flexible. And especially with volunteers who maybe they initially engaged, or, they were furloughed, but now they're going back to work. They might be a bit concerned about their ability to commit. And I'm just like, it's okay. I don't want you to stress. I don't want, you to be doing too much. If you need to then take a step back, that's great. Or if you need to finish your role, that's fine. Like, don't, I think it's just, not putting any pressure or restrictions as much as possible.
That's great. Denise, do you have any ideas of other tools that people can use? I know we're all online, Zoom, whatever, all these online platforms. Is there anything that you've come across to keep volunteers engaged and listen to volunteers through the pandemic, or are we just stuck with Zoom and Teams?
At the moment, we're stuck with Zoom and Teams. I mean, we've done... we did an old-fashioned letter actually with a Christmas card. I just signed all of the 255 of them just last Friday, because we thought we are sick of Zoom and Teams, and we did want to do something a wee bit different. So we've done that with a wee pack, a kind of wellbeing pack and stuff. So that's going out to volunteers from us this week, just for our own volunteers who are directly involved in services. So I think it's just about trying to be fresh and change it up. So don't just keep doing it, don't keep doing it always the same. Try and mix it up a wee bit. And I think it is important just to kind of keep that contact going. So yeah. I like the idea of the magnetic car signs that I'm seeing in the,
that's
that was a wee bit modern. I haven't seen that before. We haven't come across that. That's great.
Well, maybe go back to Emer to get a bit of the chat, because I saw things were quite busy there. You've been running the poll, Emer. What have people been saying?
Absolutely. So I'll share the results of the poll now. Hopefully.
There we go.
No, perfect. So some really interesting chat. Again, a lot of chat coming through the function, which is fantastic to see. Like yourself, Denise, I'm really surprised to hear about the magnetic car signs, but that is the purpose of running events like this, to share these ideas, which is fantastic. A lot of chat about the benefits of using social media, that we're seeing a lot from our members. One trick that may be helpful if you're new to social media and you don't know where to start, are locating other community transport organisations on social media platforms. I will share the link to the CTA Twitter page, and through that you will be able to see and locate other community transport organisations, which hopefully will be useful to a lot of people in connecting you to different organisations.
Thanks, Emer. You're going to be running another poll now. What's that poll on?
Yeah. So the third poll that I will be running today, so we're very busy, is about the use of digital platforms for managing your volunteers. So I will launch this poll while we have Jamie speaking today.
So we'll launch that poll now, and then obviously, Jamie, we're going to come to you in a second to talk about this topic of digital volunteering. Jan, I don't think has joined us. Emily, unfortunately, we don't have her here. But I just wanted to ask you a quick question, just about what's been the most successful way that you have found in your organisation to recruit? You saw the poll results there. Does that jive with you? All of the above? Is there anything specifically that have you any tips, stories to tell us of how we could better recruit volunteers?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Probably all of the above. We've recruited, often by word of mouth, or we're very fortunate in Swansea as a city of sanctuary to have a lot of organizations that support asylum seekers and refugees. So some people who maybe are already involved in volunteering in other organizations, they hear about the car scheme and they feel like, I'm a confident driver, I'm sure that I could help out. And we often kind of bridge volunteers amongst several organizations. I will say that with a Facebook ad, it's a really easy way to do it. You can pin the volunteer job description to the top of your page. It doesn't cost that much, and you can control how wide the reach is and how much you want to pay. I will say that even though I had a lot of responses through Facebook, I'd probably say maybe 1 in 5 actually became a volunteer driver. But it did generate a lot of interest, and it's something that's quite shareable and easy to do. So yeah, but I would just say our Council for Voluntary Service has been my go-to. That's where I've had the majority of referrals. They've done a fantastic job.
That's great. Sorry, my attention was distracted there. We have the world's least friendly cat. And for some reason, once I've started this webinar, the cat has become the most friendly cat in the world. So my wife's working at home, so I had to busy text her and say, can you please get the cat to get off my knee? And this cat never sits on anybody's knee. So I don't know why today she's really excited to be around me. So there you go. But thanks for that, Emily. Emer, maybe just before Jamie speaks, maybe you just share the digital volunteering poll there with us, and we could maybe see the results of that.
Absolutely. So as you can see, we have 46% of our participants do use digital methods, and 54% said they do not. So it would be really interesting to hear from the participants who voted no as to some of the reasons why not.
Yeah, and we'll hear from Jamie, who's going to speak a little bit about some of those topics. I have to say, Jamie, I'm a little shocked by those results, because when we were talking last week in preparation for this, you were telling me you had run a survey where maybe 10% of people said they were open to digital volunteering. So we obviously have a very well advanced bunch with us today.
Yeah, it seems so. Yeah, from the survey work I did for my paper earlier in the year, when you weeded out people who were just using email or other kind of digital that are commonly in use, but I was really trying to get at people who are using more sophisticated forms of digital, like mobile phones, dedicated mobile phone applications. Only 10% of the people surveyed in community volunteering transport said they were open to kind of more advanced methods of management and coordination. So that's quite an interesting stat of 54%, yeah.
Well, we'll maybe get some details from Emer in a few minutes as to what I mean by that. But you've obviously, as you've just shared with us, you've undertaken some research. Primarily your research was looking at issues in and around health that transport were a part of. Can you tell us a bit of what you found out in terms of your research on delayed discharge and the transport issues around that, and maybe help us understand about where transport fits?
Sure. Well, the project was around an NHS Innovation Challenge that was set December last year. As I said, or as you introduced me, I've been doing an MSc in Digital Health Systems, and the idea of community and social care was an area of interest for me. So I applied to take part in the challenge and got through. And then obviously COVID came along, which was a bit of a disruptor. And so in order to get the work done, I worked through Rachel and Emma at Community Transport Association and a host of different community transport organisations around Scotland to do the survey work and find out. So that was quite interesting. So I chose transport as the focal point because obviously delayed discharge is a really wide-ranging issue, and there's not a lot of great data about why things are happening. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, even within clinicians, about why things are going wrong, why people are getting delayed. Some clinicians will blame pharmacy. The pharmacists blame junior doctors for not getting the script right. So, there's a kind of a blame game. Nurses will blame social care for not getting things ready in time. And into that mix comes transport, which is obviously critical. And it was kind of mind-blowing when I got into understanding how this operates, because, it's not been my background. I've not worked in that world. So investigating that with a fresh pair of eyes was quite eye-opening. And it seemed that no one really had a handle on how and what was happening with transport, especially with community transport, from what I could find. And there was kind of shocking anecdotal stuff that I came across of, taxis, the amount of taxis that were getting used, and it all seemed very reactive. It seemed poorly planned. There didn't seem to be the systems in place. So I chose transport as a focal point because obviously delayed discharge, you've got to get people home, right? But in the over 65s that I was looking at, there's probably quite a slim amount of people within the over 65s who either can't get home any other way, so a family member can't pick them up, what have you, or they're fit enough and mobile enough for someone to get into a normal car. They don't have to go to an ambulance, they don't need oxygen or any of these things. So there's quite a thin sliver that you can effectively attack and help. So that's what I looked at, and that's why, I did the survey work and wanted to investigate, what's the propensity and what's the adoption and the usage of digital among community transport volunteers. So that was the interesting thing, is with the best will in the world, we could develop a fantastic application, but if transport volunteers don't want to use that and would prefer a business as usual approach of being managed and coordinated over email, phone or text message, then how do you bridge that gap? And there seemed to be a slight kind of digital divide, which again is something that we explored with older people and the use of digital. So in the survey work, a lot, but I think it was around 80% of the people surveyed said they had a smartphone, but they didn't really use applications. So there was a disconnect between ownership of technology and use of technology, right? So I then started to think about, okay, well, how do we solve this problem? How could you get a younger population involved in this process? And Emma actually provided me with the stats about how recruitment of younger people into transport volunteering is really difficult because it's not cool. So how can you incentivize a younger volunteer to get into that space? And so I looked at the idea of car clubs, because a lot of younger people don't have ready access to a car. How could you build up points through an application where when you do tasks, you gain points, you could then effectively redeem those points in a car club scheme, so that car could, when it's not in use for transport volunteering, could be used by a younger volunteer to go and do a shopping trip or whatever it might be. So we started to look at I started to look at lots of different ways of kind of solving the problem. So there was some interest among younger volunteers around the idea of being able to use a car.
So what you're saying there is, let's keep this in the NHS sector, that the NHS would have a fleet of cars that would be used for this, say, delayed discharge. And if a younger person is volunteering on that, if they bring 3 people home this week, they get a certain amount of points for that, and they can use one of the car from this pool at the weekend to do their shopping or to go where they need to go for socialization or exercise purposes. That's what you're talking about.
No, it's just an idea that I was exploring because it was very difficult. So there's a younger group who that appealed to, and then you get into practical considerations around insurance, etc. But there's kind of a sweet spot of younger people who'd be prepared to do this if they could get something in return, which I know is not exactly, wholly altruistic, but and then you've got the older people who do the volunteering because they want to give back, and then you've got the people in the middle who love the idea of volunteering, but their lives have taken over. They've got careers, families, and they just don't have the time to do it. So that was kind of roughly where the survey work indicated that you potentially have to do something. But the other thing that I looked at doing is, if you're collecting points and you can demonstrate the work that you're doing in the community. So I don't want to get too technical, but we're looking at using a technology called blockchain, which would then create a kind of immutable record of work that can't be messed with. People would be able to collect this immutable record of work, what they've done, how many hours, what they've done in their community. And then by single tasks, there's been a lot of talk about social media and recruitment. People, if they delivered someone home, done a task, done a bit of befriending, settled them in after a delayed discharge, that task would then be on the mobile application and they would be able to share that on the social media channels. I've just gained 2,000 points by delivering Mary home. We had a chat, whatever it might be. That could then go onto Facebook, Twitter, etc. And then it acts as a recruitment tool to get other people interested in, what's this scheme? You're earning points for what? So, etc. So again, we're looking at, if you like, gamifying the volunteering experience and then using it as a channel to recruit more volunteers and gain adherence.
What do you mean by gamifying, Jamie? Can you explain that?
All right. So gamification is an idea that came into digital around 2008. So there was an application called Foursquare that came along. I don't know if people have heard of that, familiar with that, remember it. And it's essentially making a game of something that's not a game. So bringing game elements into something that's a work task. So people earn badges, they get points, they do all these things. So it kind of works in the same psychology that a like button does on Facebook. So it's been well documented how addictive like buttons and how many likes you get. It's a kind of dopamine kick that people get effectively from that. So it's using that kind of same kind of behavioral economics, but applying it to something like a volunteering task.
Yeah, well, Emily told me a great story about gamification when we were chatting. I don't know if you want to tell the story about Emily. I think it was Foursquare you were using, and what was you ran to the pub and ran home, but your friend beat you. Is not what happened. Yet, Emily ran to the pub to try and beat somebody and get a higher running percentage for the week, and ran to the pub and ran home, but then still lost anyway. So, do you think gamification is something you could use in your organisation?
Yeah, so I got a Fitbit a few years ago, and you've got your weekly like step challenge or whatever. And I was on holiday with a friend, and I was neck and neck with someone, and we were about to go to bed, and then it was like, nope, we got to go out, we got to get more steps, and she like really like fed into it. But we lost anyway, unfortunately, because one of my friends is extremely active and fit. So she must have gone on a 10-mile run or something at the same time as I was in Switzerland trying to get these extra steps. Total failure. But yeah, and gamification is really interesting. And somebody that I know, the volunteer coordinator at Swansea University, she uses it with students, and it's extremely successful. And she's actually done something where they all enjoy Harry Potter, so they kind of can join different houses, and then it's like the house competition. I feel like for me, most of my volunteers are a bit older, and their motivation is that they just want to give back to the community. They want to meet people, they want to support people who are vulnerable, and that is what is so rewarding. And I often have volunteers who say, because we give mileage reimbursement, which is part of the grant from the National Lottery, and they're like, you don't need to pay me, I'll just do it for free. And I'm like, no, I have to pay you because this demonstrates the need for the service. And then if they want to donate that money back, either to us as an organization or to any other charity or cause, I fully support that. But I don't think they would buy into gamification. And a lot of people, they're not as, technologically inclined. They may not have smartphones. And yeah, I'm usually communicating by email or text message. Not even everybody has like WhatsApp. So I feel for myself, I feel like gamification is not going to be a huge motivation for our volunteers.
What would you say to Emily, Jamie? I think there'd be a lot of nervousness, I think, about something like this. And obviously this is primarily offered to younger people, and maybe it's for members who are here today to think about things maybe other than driving that younger people might be able to get involved in, and obviously for driving as well. But what would you say to Emily and other members here today who might be a bit nervous about this new technology? What would you say to them to help them to maybe embrace it?
Well, the platform that we're looking at will have these aspects to it, but just in the way that the application can be used to manage, coordinate, and collect data about what's happening, how many jobs are getting done, that kind of backroom staff of piece of collecting the data to understand what is happening and who's doing what, etc. The application would be able to do that. People don't have to share things on Facebook. It's not compulsory. It's just a bit of fun, and people can participate in that or enjoy that or not. It's optional. So the crux of it, the core of it is actually the management and coordination of volunteers, understanding what jobs need to be done, who's available to do those jobs, and being able to pick those jobs up seamlessly through one application. And again, we're looking at ways where people might be resistant to using an application. So how can we augment that so it's inclusive as possible, so that, okay, I don't need to interact with the app to do all these other things, but if I can get the messages on the app that tell me about jobs and I can accept them, then it's, even its most basic function, it's providing a service.
Yeah, well, Denise, you obviously straddle both these worlds. You can obviously hear people saying what Emily's saying, a nervousness, and you hear advocates like Jamie who you're putting a very compelling case about what you can do front of house and back of house with these applications. How do you in your role bridge those two worlds?
I mean, I think we're going to need to do all of this and more. I think we can't any longer think that the volunteers we have now are going to be with us in 5 years' time. We have to be starting to move through and find new ways to get younger people, different people, and to try different ways of engaging. So there's a couple of observations I wanted to make. Just I don't know, Jamie, you're pushing against open door here in the sense that every week, I mean, practically, I'm not exaggerating, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, I've had practically every week a call or an email from a new IT product to manage volunteers and to do exactly the kind of thing you're talking about. It seems to be that everybody who was thinking about developing something like this has been using the lockdown period to busily work away on this. I've had new befriending ones, the kind of thing you're talking about, gamification, I've seen several versions of that lately. And I know that colleagues, I brought it up at a UK steering group this week about maybe doing a piece of mapping. So I think there will be a piece of work, because I saw a question in the chat about that. At the last record, Volunteering Matters had 42, I think it was, different volunteer management platforms that are commercially available at the moment, and that was before the last 6 months has kind of passed. So I think we have seen a real mushrooming of these kinds of products over the last number of while. The big issue I can see is that the skills, my skills, I've been volunteering managing for 20 years. I am not a digital native. Neither are lots of other of us. Maybe there are lots of newbies on the call, but a lot of people who've been in volunteer management don't have the skills actually to be able to get the best from some of these products, leave alone the volunteers who are going to transition or maybe not transition onto them. So I think there's a huge digital development piece for the sector, which is really, really important. And I just think, personally, jumping onto the bandwagon of one product over another is a really big decision for an organization, and it's very nerve-wracking because you kind of think, oh, well, I'm buying the best of what's available to me, and someone else in the chat said about the cost of them. They can be hugely expensive, especially if you're developing a bespoke system. So as we took a decision to stop doing that about 4 or 5 years ago, because the money you just could hemorrhage money in terms of development of digital stuff. And so we have chosen to deliberately buy off the peg, as you call it. So you don't always get what you want then, but you get something and so we use 2 platforms. We've used Better Impact, we've been using since 2012 for our big events team, and it has worked great for us. We've got used to it. The team are used to it. We have a lot of older volunteers who use it regularly. I think it has just become custom and practice for our big events team. And I have to say, we couldn't run things like the Open and stuff like that without it. It's been a fantastic tool for us. We have more recently launched Be Collective, which is an Australian product. Again, we went to the market. We did a whole procurement exercise this time last year. And so we have launched Be Collective in Northern Ireland, which supports, it's a free-to-air thing. So our member groups are using it for free, and it does do the volunteer management piece. It also does a social record, which allows volunteers to record their learning, their experience, their skills, and provide that kind of CV building side of things for volunteers and individuals, because we do think, particularly as the likelihood of unemployment is growing, we think that's going to be increasingly important for many volunteers over the next number of months. But I'm not saying it's perfect. It's a great product. We're finding it good, but there's dozens of great products out there, and I just think this is an area that needs a lot more work and thought in terms of kind of our strategic infrastructure support role. That's certainly something I'm concentrating our efforts on over the next number of months.
The way I see this is because the shift from acute care to care within the community has been talked about in Audit Scotland reports and various different, certainly in Scotland, in the research that I did, it's been talked about for a decade now, and nothing's happened. So you still have this rotation of what they call frequent flyers, of older people who are passing in or out of. So apparently there's now a proper, that is going to be mandated with integrated joint boards and health and social care partnerships to try and actually make this happen. Now, the only way I can see this properly happening is, instead of it being on one side systems within hospitals and systems within social care, which are siloed and don't talk to each other, the only way to do this, and this is a kind of, this is beyond the kind of the reach of what we're trying to do right now. I think these things have to be joined up, but I think if they're going to achieve the aim, proper care in the community, third sector has to be part of that planning process, and the data has to be transparent and it's got to be shared so that everyone can see who's doing what, where the bottlenecks are, so that planning provision and budgets can go to the right areas where demand is being sought, and also that data will allow social care and local authorities to understand where there's an over demand for services and where they're not being supplied, and the ability for data to provide that and provide that transparency so that better planning can occur and care in community can actually happen. At the moment, it's a bit of a pipe dream, but that's possible. And this is the, if you like, the start of it. So back to the kind of the funding aspect of this, my ambition for this is if we could demonstrate to NHS just around delayed discharge and social care, if we can demonstrate through the data that actually working with third sector, we can keep those people in the community and we can start to demonstrate, well, here are your savings, then this application and the use of it for the third sector should be free, because it will be saving, countless millions to health and social care. So that's where I kind of see it going, that, third sector shouldn't be paying for this technology. It should be coming from NHS and local government.
Thanks, Jamie. I just want to go back to Emer and just see what that is. We've got literally a couple of minutes left. We've actually overrun. But Emer, if you just help us just see where the chat's at the moment, where participants are at, and then we'll get some final thoughts and we'll wrap up. Emer.
Absolutely. So there's been a lot of feedback coming through the chat at the moment. A lot of it resonates with a lot of your findings, Jamie, that you have found. We'll just head into. So most of it being around digital platforms and the age of volunteers. There's a huge worry around that. Some of it contradicting that, saying that a lot of their volunteers are older, but still are very used to using email and platforms like that. There is also telephone, etc. And it's not all done over social media. And again, about the cost of digital platforms is coming through quite a lot. Some of the really interesting points in regards to gamification that have come through is about using some sort of point system that could maybe be tied in with an insurance company or the NHS, which I think are really interesting and good ideas. And I think that's definitely opened up a whole other can of worms for a conversation.
I like that idea of, that cheaper insurance or, some sort of benefit like that. If you've done this amount of volunteering, that you get a 10% reduction in your insurance. And particularly for young people, I think, Emily, young people in your organization, if you could offer that package, wow, like volunteer recruitment, my goodness, it's going to skyrocket.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to be fair, a lot of volunteers, the 45p per mile, even for dead mileage, which is when not transporting a person, is pretty good incentive for kind of donating your time. But yeah, I think especially for young people, a discount on insurance would be a huge, motivational factor to get involved.
Yeah. Well, just as we finish, Denise, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of the questions in the question and answer, because actually that issue about HMRC and benefits is important to consider. If you're paying something of material benefit, so the gamification thing works fine when it's low level, small beer. Whenever you start to get into something of material value, you could be in a situation where you're creating a contract, and there would need to be some clear discussion with HMRC about the parameters for some of this, and just being completely certain that you can, because otherwise you're going to do something which actually you won't be able to use in the end, because people will end up paying tax on it, which is not where you want to go. The other question that was in there just about the minimum wage being the best to use to calculate. I mean, it's a rough and ready way of calculating. The best way I've seen is the volunteer investment value audit, which is basically looks at each role specifically, and it does a whole kind of calculation. I have it on our website, Tim. I can share it with you afterwards if you want. And it just, there's a spreadsheet all set up, and you use the kind of role specific, and you put in what it would cost if you were paying someone to do that, and so that you can calculate an actual cost, and then you're also offsetting that with the input costs as well. So it ends up with a ratio of what you're spending to what you're you're getting back, and it's a really good way of doing it. So I think that was just in terms of the questions. I didn't want to forget anybody. I think we've dealt with the rest of them, but those are the two that were outstanding.
And Jamie, just a final thought from you, just responding to maybe some of the concerns people have and some of the ideas that have just been generated there, just in the Emer's feedback.
Yeah, well, I mean, the possibilities of what digital can do are they're out there. But what we've got to look at is we've got to design something that will get adopted. So it's going to be simple to use. It's going to be inclusive. And there will be elements that people might want to go further with. So, we want to keep it simple because obviously we want we want a solution like this adopted, and the current market is older. So we've got to think about that when we're designing. Yeah.
And Emily, just a final thought from you. We'll leave it for you to just to sum up our entire session. From a service operator's point of view, what do you think you could take away from today that might help you better run your own car scheme?
I think for me, the recruitment of younger volunteers would definitely be advantageous. I think it's important to consider gamification and maybe using something digital or, an interface. We actually had a volunteer who can write code. He actually kind of designed something for us, and we were about to launch it when the pandemic started. And so then everything kind of took a step back. I'm able to do everything kind of old school, just using Excel, and I'm able to meet my targets that have been set by the lottery for this project. However, if this is a scheme that's going to continue after this funding is finished, I think we have to really look into digital platforms and utilizing technology as best we can. But yeah, I think having something that's very easy to use, accessible to as many people as possible of any age is really important.
Well, thanks, Emily. I don't know if we're to put your coder through a spreadsheet, how many hundred thousands of benefit that would come out. That would be an interesting one. Listen, Denise, Jamie, Emily, everybody who's been on the chat, thank you so much. I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but that's an hour that just flew by. It's just a fascinating topic that we've got here. Just one final thing I just wanted to say just before we go is, in the Community Transport Association, we have a policy committee, and we discuss some of these issues that we've been discussing today. If you want to be part of that, there is an application process to go through. But if you're interested in getting more involved in policy and community transport, drop me an email or drop an email to any of our websites or any of our email addresses, and we'll be able to have a chat with you if you want to be further involved in this. I think we need another session on this. I think we could have just done gamification and nothing else today and looked at that. So thank you so much. That's been fascinating. It certainly sparked a lot of ideas for myself, and I know from the chat there, it's been it's been on fire in the chat there, and thanks to Emer for moderating that. Listen, thanks very much, everybody. Our next session is the 10th of December. Our next big question, big idea. We're going to wrap up the year, and we're going to look back on the year that was and look forward to the year that's going to be. So sign up for that, and we'll hopefully see you then. Listen, everybody, thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.